Today, being young and involved in producer groups and looking for a solution to agricultural plastics in Alberta. Hello and welcome back to The Bovine. I'm your host, Debra Murphy. I'm going to take a quick moment to recognize the events of the world. It's heavy right now, and I know I found myself just completely immobilized by it all. If you're on social media or listening to the news, you might be grappling with it too. Empathy doesn't balk at long distance. The day the news broke of the invasion, I watched the most magnificent sunset on the farm and was racked with both gratitude and guilt. What did I do to deserve this fortune? And what in the world can I do to help others who aren't as fortunate? And in these days that follow, it's a cycle between not knowing what to do and just trying to continue. To recognize the hurt and fear of others in the world and keep going, keep talking, keep working, keep being, and offering what little or what lot we can to those in pain. And though today is difficult too, let's launch into a podcast. Let's talk about cattle and about being involved in the industry we love and recognize the privilege that so many of us live with, that we can see the sunset, the most magnificent sunsets on quiet lands. As I mentioned in the outline off the start, today we're going to focus in on two issues. The first is youth involvement in the industry, in committees and boards, and in this case at Alberta Beef Producers. I'm sure you'd expect that. And the second is agricultural plastics in the province. So we'll break that into two segments. There'll be two separate discussions. The first with a former delegate who is still actively involved in that file on behalf of Alberta Beef Producers. And the second is with a producer who is involved in the Lethbridge County pilot for silage pit plastics. So stay tuned for those discussions. I want to take this opportunity to also say thank you for joining us for our third show, our third episode of The Bovine. We're very excited to be here, but even more excited to have you come along with us. Our first guest today has been on the Alberta Beef Producers as a delegate for nearing 8 years and has served as the finance chair on the board of directors for one. Raised on his family's ranch in the southeast zone, Brodie Haugan attended the University of Saskatchewan, earned a Bachelor of Science in Agribusiness, and then returned to the family farm. He's also a past board member of the Young Cattlemen's Council and a graduate of the Cattlemen's Young Leaders Program. Brodie, it's good to talk to you and welcome to The Bovine.
Thank you very much for the invite, Deborah.
I want to talk to you about your involvement in YCC and CYL, but first, can you give us a sense of what inspired you to choose agriculture, first going into post-secondary education and ultimately returning to the farm?
Yeah, it was never really a decision, I guess, for me. It was something I grew up with. I knew I was always going to be a part of it. So what intrigued me was that there's so many different avenues that you can take in agriculture. So even with the general agriculture degree, like I got from the U of S, I knew I could take it and apply it to many, many different areas or sectors. So far, it's taken me back to the family operation, but I've been getting involved with a lot of things outside of the operation as well.
You've taken a seat at the table at ABP for a number of years now, as I mentioned, and you're one of the younger subset of delegates. How has your experience been in those boardrooms, kind of representing that younger generation?
It's definitely been interesting. I got involved quite early on, I guess. Where our ranch is situated, we sort of lost our community quite a few years ago when I was younger. And I knew that I sort of had a choice of when I came back to the farm, sort of either putting my head down and living in the bubble of the farm. I needed to get involved and have some interaction outside of the operation as well, but still in the industry. So that's what drew me towards ABP. And it's sort of been a learning experience ever since. I've been involved for 8 years, but every year seems to be a little different than the last. And I look forward to the next couple of years coming up.
Has it made a difference, do you think, being younger? Or have you felt welcome? Have you felt good at those tables?
I definitely felt welcomed. It definitely, in my opinion, changed the conversation a little bit, having a younger perspective around the table and, maybe shaking up the comfort zone of some of the conversations in the groups of people. But it's been good. We've been seeing a lot of young people getting involved, especially because they're since the development of the Cattlemen Young Leaders Program. But it's been awesome for our program and across the country. We've been seeing a lot more youth getting involved. Yeah, it's been an interesting 8 years. I think it's been good for everyone.
What do you think, and thinking back to your first year, what were some of the barriers to you getting involved, and what are some barriers to other young people getting involved, whether that's as a delegate or on an advisory council or even in a board capacity like you are now?
So I think the biggest thing, especially as a young person, it comes back to the time commitment. As we all know in this industry, it seems like we have more and more on our shoulders and less time. And especially being young, there's a lot of other pressures on you, such as, starting a family, building your operation and your involvement in your operation. And it's definitely a balance. It always comes back to sort of where's the next best place to put your next hour of time in the day into. And I've always felt it was important to get off our operation and be involved with producer organizations like ABP in order to hopefully have a say in setting where our future is going, because it's going to have a direct effect back to where we're going in the next couple of years, since we'll still be involved in the industry, hopefully for another 20 or 30 years. To being young and getting involved, it's just taking the time to get involved. You just got to make it happen for yourself. I think the biggest thing I've learned is that you just got to make the time, and it's what you make it. You can show up and not be involved and not get up and talk, but really you're just wasting your own time, and you really got to show up to these meetings and not be scared to stand up and say what you believe in, and just get involved and make sure you're capitalizing on the time you are putting into it.
So you're kind of talking about helping guide the direction of the industry. What do you take back from it? Are there benefits to you personally as well?
I always go to these boards with the understanding that, what might be best for me is also possibly best for people like me, similar age, similar operations. And it's going into these boards with the mind frame that it's what's best for everyone is best for me, and making sure it's not just about me and our operations. It's a bigger picture than that. This ABP for sure is bigger than any one individual producer, and it's a big industry that has a lot of voices. And I've definitely learned and met a lot of people along the way, and I've been involved for 8 years, like I mentioned, and a lot of it was just gathering information and knowledge and connections with people. And now I feel like I can really give back at the board table, but also I'm able to bring back to my own operation and back to my family some of the lessons I've learned and opportunities that I've become aware of through the discussions at the board table and within industry, and really been able to bring them home and apply them to our operation, or at least we're looking out for them as they're being developed. And we hear talk with neighbors and around the community of what's coming, and it's really been an interesting dynamic with neighbors and friends, sort of talking about the things that are coming towards us in our industry and what actually might help us with our businesses at home. So,
do you also think that by being involved, you can bring back something to other youth who may be interested? And if so, what is that? And how do organizations like ABP support that as well?
Well, it seems to always be a topic of conversation at any of our meetings, is how do you get more young people involved in our industry, or even just new people involved? And I think it's not really specific to, how to get a certain age group of people involved. It's more, if we make our industry stronger, more profitable, with more security, it will attract a wide range of people back to our industry, and hopefully those are youth. And at the end of the day, that's all we can do, is to try to create the best business or economic scenario for people looking to get involved.
You mentioned Cattlemen's Young Leaders and Young Cattlemen's Council, and I did too, because that's actually how we met. Can you give a little bit of background on those?
Yeah, so the Cattlemen Young Leaders program, I believe, started back in 2010 as a pilot program in Alberta, where they selected just a handful of young individuals with the purpose of matching them with mentors that had like-minded interests or were in specific area within the industry that the young individual was also curious of learning more about. Since the first year, it's been a wonderful success for all the individuals involved, both mentors or mentees and the mentors. It's been a huge success for our industry in whole. You can see people involved across all sectors of the ag industry that have a connection back to the Cattlemen Young Leaders program.
Can you tell us a bit about your mentorship?
Yeah, so I guess I got involved in the third year the program existed in 2013. And looking back on it, I guess I have some wishes things I would have done. I sort of went into it without the right mind frame, but since then I've definitely learned from it. It was a very positive experience for me. I learned a lot, met a lot of people. I focused more on the business side of ranching and also the political side how to get involved, bigger picture than just your individual operation. And it took me to some very interesting places. Was able to travel to Ottawa several times, as well as a couple different provincial meetings, as well as down to Mexico for the Five Nation Beef Alliance trip, to Nashville for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association meeting, and to the Denver Stock Show. So I've had some wonderful opportunities through the program.
You sort of touched on the fact that you've maybe do things a little differently if you could. What would you have done differently?
It's more just the mind frame, and I'd say this applies to all, like not just the CYL program, but also any board you might get involved with. It's what you make it. If you need to jump in with the full willingness to participate and jump in head first and make the best of the time you are there, because it is a finite amount of time, and we're all busy people in this industry, and you got to make every minute count.
What about the Young Cattlemen's Council? Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, so Young Cattlemen's Council was again created several years after the Cattlemen Young Leaders program. And it was sort of in mirror image of a program that was running in the United States, where it connected young individuals to the industry, but more in a political way. And it mirrored that sort of our Canadian Cattlemen's Association, or ABP, where we had representatives from across the province that were more closely connected to what ABP and CCA were doing, and were able to attend some of these meetings that were being held. It was sort of created as a stepping stone to get fully involved with your provincial organizations across the country, in hopes that we would generate more young involvement with our provincial organizations.
A program like that, does it sort of take away from the opportunity to just jump right into being involved, or does it somehow compete with existing producer organizations?
No, absolutely not. I think if anything, it sort of just gives you a snapshot of what the big picture looks like when it comes to cattle politics across the country. And it really helps you get the education behind what the purpose of the different associations are, and how they work together, and how they're connected, and how it has a big effect on our industry. And it really allows those individuals involved with the YCC then to make an honest decision if they want to jump in head first with their provincial organizations. And then at the same time, it really shortens the learning curve to really get involved and really participate in those associations such as ABP. I feel like it really cut down that learning curve for me, especially when I came into ABP, because I already felt like I had a lot of those connections and general understanding of how the process has worked throughout our industry.
We kind of kept it very formal, but can you tell us, have you enjoyed your time with ABP?
Yeah, I've loved it. Like I said before, every year seems to be a little bit different. The first couple of years I was involved was more as a spectator. I sort of sat back and listened and learned. And then I sort of made a conscious decision about year 4 or 5 that either I needed to get in all the way or get out. And I decided to jump in. So I ran for the board. So I've been sitting on the board now for the last 3 years. And then this past year, I decided to step up as the finance chair to get involved with the executive. And so I've been continuously progressing and sort of altering where my interests are and where I think I can really help for some of the subcommittees that I sit on. But I look forward to the next couple of years, and hopefully I'm around for the full 10-year tenure on ABP.
Do you get a watch or something at that point?
No, I'm not sure what it is, but I think just a year off and maybe get involved in something else after 10 years will be a much needed break and award enough.
Brodie, normally at this point in the interview, I'd thank the guests for their time, wish them well. But I was wondering if maybe for the next segment, you'd like to take the host chair and do an interview from a producer and, dare I say, young delegate perspective.
I sure can.
Great. Up next, Assar Grinde, a fellow farmer, rancher, and past delegate, joins guest host Brodie Haugan to talk agricultural plastics in Alberta.
So we would like to welcome Assar Grinde to the show. Assar, we have a little bit of history sitting on ABP together for the last couple of years. Do you want to give us a bit of a rundown of your experience and involvement with ABP in the past?
You and me, actually, I think we came in as delegates the same year, and then I got quite involved in things and got onto the board, and I wish I would have had you there as another young guy right away to, it would have been nice. But then did we even, I think when you got on the board, I had moved back. So we might have only overlapped on the board for a year. But yeah, I'm really glad to see you there. And congratulations for getting on the executive. I think you're doing a great job.
Yeah, I'm trying my best. I said the same thing. I like having some young people around the board table too. It creates a good discussion. So back to the specifics of what we're here to talk about today. Can you give us a background on the ag plastics work that you started with ABP and you've been leading up ever since?
Yeah, I know way more about ag plastics now than I thought I ever would. Really, it all started off just because I think it was like in 2015, I made a resolution at our producer meetings just to ask ABP to kind of look at what the Alberta government could do to deal with ag plastics. Like a lot of people, ag plastics are so important for us on the farm, but there's not a lot of options for some people to deal with it. So in 2016, I think there was a couple more resolutions passed at our fall meetings, producer meetings from Zone 5 and 6, I think. We passed them at the annual general meeting that year. And at the same time, there was a lot of other movement on the ag plastics file in the province from like the Ag Service Board and the rural municipalities and some of the other commodity groups that wanted the government to try to figure out what to do with this stuff. Together, a bunch of those organizations and stakeholders formed the Agricultural Plastics Working Group to kind of spearhead the effort. And so I sit on the executive of that as ABP's representative. And probably the biggest outcome of that work that the APRG has done to date has been the establishment of that pilot program. So the Alberta government funded a ag plastics recycling pilot program for grain bags and twine. It was a 3-year, $1 million pilot program to look at studying the logistics and the cost and some of the obstacles to recycling those two products. Started with 20 collection sites in the first year, and now we're up to 90 collection sites. So I think we have about 30 collection partners. Like a collection partner might be a municipality or a waste commission, but they might have 5 or 6 sites. So we're up to 90 collection sites in the province. That doesn't cover it everywhere, but we have really tried hard to make sure there's a geographical distribution of the collection sites. Obviously, the counties or the waste commissions have to be interested, and they have to apply to Cleanfarms to operate a collection site in the pilot. But anybody that wants to, they've been able to get some collection sites established there.
So when we're talking about ag plastics, just to be more specific, well, what are we talking about? I know on our operation, we deal with a lot of mesh wrap, mineral tubs, silage plastic. So what are we specifically looking at, and maybe what are we looking at in the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. So like ag plastics include all those things you talked about, like the big ones, I think in 2019. So at the start of the pilot, we actually did a waste characterization study through Cleanfarms. I should say Cleanfarms is like the APRG is the group that's overseeing the pilot program, but we hired through a public tender. We obviously needed somebody with the capabilities to run the program. So we hired Cleanfarms, which is a stewardship organization some people might be familiar with, to run the pilot program. So a lot of the work, they've done the work for us, I guess. And anyway, so in 2019, we did a waste characterization study, and it showed that of all the ag plastics that we use in the province, I think there's 24% of it was silage pit plastic, 23% was twine, 22% was grain bags. So those are the big three. And then, like net wrap at the time was only 5%, pesticide containers was 6%. And then there's a lot of other things like, like some of the greenhouse film, mineral tubs and stuff are all very small compared to the other products. So that's why, like in the pilot program at the time when it started in 2019, the reason why they focused on grain bags and twine was those are two of the bigger plastics that are used on farms, and they're also both easily recyclable, and they have markets. So grain bags and twine, they both have recyclers in North America that will take the product and then turn it into a pellet that they can then sell back in the commodity market, to make new plastic product. Grain bags in particular, there's a really good story in Alberta. We have 2 of the 3 grain bag recyclers in North America, one in Bashaw and one in Assar down in southern Alberta. The one in Polyag in Bashaw, they're taking grain bags from Western Canada. They clean them, shred them, extrude them into pellets, and then they're selling those plastic recycled pellets for lots of different things. But some of them have just started going back to a grain bag manufacturer in Alberta to add into new grain bags. So that's really what the purpose of a lot of this is to get to, is rather than throwing out the plastic, like using it once and getting rid of it, if we can encourage a system that will reuse those plastics, and eventually, who knows, with technology, you can get to the point where there's more of a full circle economy for plastics rather than just like downcycling. You use it maybe 2 or 3 times recycling and then it ends up in the landfill anyways.
So what was the main goal when you started going down this path? I heard from you that you wanted to sort of have a solution for ag plastics when people would typically be burning them or taking them to their landfills. Do you see this program making a meaningful impact moving forward once this pilot's done? Like, have there been some big steps taken in the research or the technology being used to recycle and get these products out of our landfills and from not being burnt?
Like, this pilot program it's not intended to do the research on, new products and stuff. It was more on studying the logistics of getting the product and the cost of getting the used product to a recycler. Like, in the big picture though, Alberta's a little bit behind. Like, Saskatchewan and Manitoba both already have permanent recycling programs. Saskatchewan's had a permanent grain bag program since 2016, and Manitoba has a permanent program for twine and grain bags since April of 2021. A lot of the provincial governments and the federal government, they actually have a plan to try to get to a full circle plastic economy by 2030, like to have 100% of the plastic going to recycling. I think that's the way the industry is going. Like, right now, a big question that most farmers have about recycling is like, what's it going to cost me? And there is a cost attached to it. The reason I'm interested in recycling, I think that there's a cost to disposal of the product. It doesn't matter what you do. If you're taking it to municipalities, which they really don't like because it's hard on their equipment, it kind of ruins the water cycling in the cells. So the municipalities, it fills up their cells. There's a cost to that. A big thing that is shocking, actually, how many people are still burning plastics in Alberta. In 2019, when we did a study on what people are doing with their plastics, 46% of farmers in Alberta are burning their twine, 26% burn their silage pit plastic, 14% were burning their grain bags. There was nobody reported burning their pesticide containers, which shows that things can change. Like, I think 85% of pesticide containers that farmers in Alberta use go back for recycling. And that didn't always used to be the case, right? And so I think culture changes over time, and burning plastics, we might think that it has no cost, but it does have a cost for human health. And a lot of the toxins that come off when you burn plastics, like dioxins and furans and heavy metals, they bioaccumulate, especially in fat of animals. And as beef farmers, I don't know if that's something that looks very good for, our land stewardship and sustainability claims to be burning that plastic on the landscape. So I don't know. I think in the long run, recycling could be part of the solution. But I also think if we're paying for the full price of disposal of a product when we buy it, then it makes other alternative products or technologies more likely to be developed. Like, there's some work going on in Alberta on biodegradable net wrap. And there's work that was going on in the UK. I'm not sure what happened to it on edible silage plastic. And then there's, like things like hemp twine and sisal twine, which are really expensive. But I know for anybody that's doing extended bale grazing and stuff, plastic management can take up a lot of labor. And then you end up having a lot of plastic left out in your pastures and stuff too. So I think there's a huge market that is there for alternative plastic products, but right now, if there's no cost to the disposal of plastics, I think they're less competitive.
So you mentioned about the cost. I know that's the number one thing of any program, new program or change that producers always have, is what's it going to cost me, and is it going to cost me labor or actual cash? So can you, I guess, talk a little bit more about, I know right now you said this is a pilot program, but I'm sure that there's some conversation about how this is going to roll out after the pilot has concluded.
That's part of one of the big goals of the pilot program, was to figure out what the cost would be in Alberta to run a permanent program, because our geography is quite a bit different. Like in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, their agricultural area is quite a bit smaller. It's compressed. So the biggest cost for a recycling program is definitely the transport, right? It's a bulky item, so you have to be able to densify it and then ship it back to the recycler. The cost in Alberta, we don't know quite yet, but you can look to Saskatchewan and Manitoba. And in Saskatchewan, the environmental handling fee that they put on the grain bags is about 5 to 7% of the total cost. So I think it works out to about $50 for for like a big grain bag. Depending on the size, it changes obviously. And then the twine, they just published the environmental handling fee for twine in Manitoba. I'm sorry, I can't remember right off the top of my head what that cost is. But another thing I should just mention quickly is with like the model, the APRG, we know that a pilot program is supposed to be a temporary thing. Like we're not going to run a pilot program forever with grants from the government. We are recommending the transition to a permanent program. And we looked at all sorts of permanent programs that are operating around the world. And really the one that we're recommending to government and to commodity groups is something called extended producer responsibility. You'll hear it called EPR. Alberta just passed legislation this past sitting in Alberta to enable it. And EPR is puts the responsibility for disposal of products back on the producer of the product rather than leaving it up to municipalities or the government. So whoever's making the product, they're also responsible for the proper disposal of it or recycling at the end of its life. And they can do that however they want. Like the legislation, when it's set up, it just says you guys have to deal with the products you're making, figure out how to do it, and then the government's only role in it is really just to make sure that they're meeting their collection thresholds. That's really what Cleanfarms is. Like they're a stewardship organization that's run by all of the big pharmaceutical and ag chem companies in Canada. I think it's the best way of doing it because it kind of gives industry and private industry the ability to run and change the program however they see fit. It gives it a lot of flexibility. And part of the recommendation that we're advocating is that any program has to have really good transparency and accountability. So farmers really want to know what they're paying for and then where that money is going to. So everything has to, like, we're recommending that everything needs to have high levels of transparency and accountability. And we also need flexibility to add new products over time. So even if we start out with an EPR program that's harmonized with Saskatchewan and Manitoba, like that's a big thing. They're already on board and the retailers would like to see harmonization with those provinces. So even if we start out with grain bags, which is the big one, and it's probably the easiest to do, and then do twine, over time, we'd like to be able to bring in other products, as solutions for them are available.
For the people that are interested in participating in this program, what is the simple answer to what is currently being accepted and what isn't as far as ag plastics go? I know I've had the discussion with you in the past about it's sort of the clean plastics right now that are easier to manage, easier to handle, and we're still working on new technologies to deal with some of the dirtier materials that might have some contamination.
Grain bags and twine are the two that the Alberta Recycle It pilot program are accepting. And I always tell people about recycling, like you don't have to try to be militant about it, right? Like I have, when I'm pulling my twine off bales, some bales you pull it off, there's hardly any contamination. I roll it up. When I get back to the Quonset, I put it in the recycling bag. If I get one that's really dirty, I don't worry about trying to clean it. I put it in like my tote that goes to the landfill that's dirty. And same thing with silage pit plastic too. I'll talk about that in a second, but you don't have to be perfect. Just do anything that you can do is better than burning or landfilling everything. So twine and grain bags are the two that we're collecting right now. Net wrap is always going to be a problem, I think, just with how contaminated it is, just with the style of the product. And then also the composition of the plastic is a little bit, I don't think recyclers have figured out if they can recycle it or not yet. Silage pit plastic is another big one that the beef industry uses. And I kind of wish at the time when this started, I wish they would have done something with silage pit plastic. But luckily, there's actually another pilot that's operating separately in Alberta right now through Alberta Cattle Feeders and Alberta Milk that's being run by Cleanfarms based solely about silage pit plastic. And silage pit plastic's actually the same as grain bags, the composition. So they needed to figure out how you could densify it and get clean pieces enough that you could transport it to a recycler in a form that they'd want it. And I think it's really promising. Like most of us that have silage, the stuff on the ends and the sides can be pretty dirty. But in the winter, especially when you're cutting off your strip for the week on the frost, it's pretty clean. And so they're just rolling it up into 4-foot pieces, and then they put it in a manual compactor on the farm. It's awesome. I think there's hope for that one, and we'll see. Technology is always changing, I guess.
Seems to change every week.
Yeah.
Something new every week. So you mentioned at the start, there's 90 collection sites currently across the province. So for a producer that's interested in doing something other than hauling it to the landfill or burning it that really wants to get involved with this, what would you suggest they do to see if there's a better solution for their ag plastic waste?
Yeah, the easiest way is to go to the Cleanfarms website and then click on like the Alberta program, and then it'll show a map with all of the collection sites. Like on a Google map, it'll show the pins of everyone, and it has a list of all of the counties and municipalities and waste commissions that are currently participating. And then all you do is for the twine, you just need to get some collection bags. They have big clear collection bags. You put the twine in. You can pick them up at any of the collection sites, and then you fill them up with your twine, your clean twine, and then you take back there. So that's pretty easy. Grain bags, it depends on the municipality. Some municipalities will come out and roll it for you. Some municipalities were actually doing that before the pilot program. They have their own grain bag roller. Some they'll lend a grain bag roller out. Some require you to have rolled grain bags that you've rolled yourself and then bring into the collection site. So the easiest way of finding out is going to the Cleanfarms website.
So thank you very much for educating us on the hard work you've been doing. I would like to point out that this is a great example of why individuals should get involved with ABP or any producer organization, because this was an issue that needed a solution for that wasn't created yet. And because of the work through ABP and many hours of dedication from yourself, we've been able to actually put something in place and making some meaningful steps towards having a long-term solution for our ag plastic waste on farm. So I'd like to thank you for the many hours and many days of dedication you've put into this program, as well as your involvement with ABP. And hopefully someday down the road, you come back to ABP as a delegate and maybe a director someday, because I'd love to see you at the table.
Sounds good. Thank you, Brodie.
That was guest host and, dare I say, future podcaster Brodie Haugan in conversation with past delegate and director Assar Grinde. The Alberta Ag Plastic Recycle It program is led by the Agricultural Plastics Recycling Group, or APRG, and is operated by Cleanfarms. It is funded through a grant from the Government of Alberta and administered by Alberta Beef Producers. You can find out more about the pilot and how you can get involved by heading to aprg.ca and cleanfarms.ca. Up next, we'll expand on the brief mention of silage pit plastic with past chair of the Alberta Cattle Feeders Association. This pilot is separate from the APRG's work on grain bags and twine and is funded in part by the Government of Canada. In this next segment, you'll hear two voices. The first is General Manager of Kasko Cattle Company, a family-owned business with 4 feedlots and over 60 employees. He's also past chair of the Alberta Cattle Feeders Association. That's Ryan Kasko. You'll also hear this voice.
Yeah, my name's Davin Johnson. I'm the Alberta Program Advisor with Cleanfarms. So I manage all the programs in Alberta on behalf of Cleanfarms. Cleanfarms is a national not-for-profit stewardship organization. We are industry-led and funded. We have stewardship programs that range across pesticide, fertilizer, seed, agricultural plastic, as well as the animal health industries.
You'll hear Davin Johnson a couple of times when we dive a little bit deeper into something that Ryan Kasko has said. And now, without further ado, here is that interview. Ryan Kasko, welcome to the Bovine.
Thank you very much.
So you're part of a silage pit plastic pilot led by Alberta Cattle Feeders Association and Alberta Milk. How did you get involved in participating in that?
Oh, man. I actually don't remember, but sometimes my name comes up as someone willing to try something. So someone reached out to us and asked if we wanted to give it a try, and we thought it was worth investigating.
How long have you been doing it?
You know, time has really become a difficult thing to measure. I have no idea, but I think it's been about a year or so.
Okay. What do you know what made you want to say yes, besides obviously your willingness to try new things?
Well, I do think that it's important for all of us to try and minimize the amount of waste that we're producing, and silage plastic or other plastics around the farm are an easy one to know that we can do a better job on. So we thought we would give it a try. So
I mentioned off the start you have 4 feedlots. Is it specific to certain areas that your operation works in right now?
We have a compactor just at one of our yards. In Coaldale. We wanted to try it out. I have to admit, I had a little bit of skepticism about how it would work, because silage plastic is kind of messy, and particularly in the wintertime when you're dealing with ice and snow. And I didn't know if it would be really easy for us to manage trying to fold it up and put it into a compactor.
So is it your own compactor, or are you renting it from somewhere? How does that
No, as part of the project, Clean Farms has brought out this machine that they've developed. I'm not sure exactly how that all came to be, but we have it just in our silage pit, and we will cut off pieces of plastic as we're using up our silage and put it in the compactor. And it's a really basic mechanism, but we're basically making a bale of plastic in our silage pit as we use up the plastic.
Okay, hold on. Let's talk about why compact plastic bales are so important in the recycling process. And also, what does this compactor look like?
The issue with any recycling program is densifying a plastic enough to get it to a recycling facility. So if it's collected loose, you're essentially shipping a bunch of air, which is really expensive and costly, as well as difficult to manage on farm. So what we've done is worked with Full Circle Plastics out of Nobleford, Alberta, to design and manufacture this egg plastic compactor. It is essentially, if you could picture, it's a four-walled rectangular structure. So you could, if you were to take pallets, you take 4 pallets and build 4 pallets on top of one. You have that cube structure. It's a little taller on 3 sides. It's 6 feet high, and on the front end where you fill it with plastic, it's 4 feet high. So it's made out of these ones made by Full Circle Plastics. They're made out of recycled plastics. So Full Circle Plastics, their business is to actually make dimensional lumber out of recycled plastics. Some of the chemical containers that are collected in our programs, as well as oil containers and paint jugs collected at municipalities across the province. It's also made with recycled drill stem pipe from the province. It's a unit that's vertically rectangular where the plastic can go in. There's a lid that rotates to slide over top of it, a chain hoist, which is used to manually compress the plastic. And so there's no power required. It's completely mobile, can be used in anywhere.
And it's completely manual. You can picture it sitting beside your silage pit, kind of out of the way, but relatively handy. And I'll try to include a picture of it on our article on abpdaily.com. Okay, and you mentioned being concerned about the dirt or like the contamination. Has that been as big of a factor as you were worried about?
Yeah, sometimes it is. It still can be a bit of a pain. Like today is a good example. It's minus 20 something outside, and so you've got ice buildup, and there was some snow on the weekend. So it's not necessarily the most pleasant job to try and clean that off and put it in the compactor, but our guys are doing their best they can to manage this project, and we probably have had a little bit better success than what I anticipated. So that's a good thing.
I'm just imagining people out there with, scrubbing brushes and stuff. What does cleaning the plastic off really look like?
It's not really like that, but we do try and get some of the debris that might stick to it. Like sometimes the silage itself will stick to the plastic, or there's dirt or whatever. We try and clean it off a little bit as best as we can, put it in the compactor. It seems to be working okay.
Okay, I know nobody's out there with scrub brushes, and it turns out you don't need to be. Here's a bit of a description on how clean you have to get that plastic.
Essentially, if you were to take the sheet of plastic that comes off a pit or a bale wrap and you grab it and flip it out like you would flip out a camping tarp to get the moisture off of it before you fold it up, that's clean enough. So mud smearing, bits of silage or hay or straw that are stuck to it, that's okay. The issue comes really when you're looking at a silage tube that's in contact with the ground. That top piece is cut open to expose the feed for the week. And then as the feed's being taken out, the loader, the tractor is driving over it. There's mud, there's rotting silage caked to the bottom. If you just take a broom and sweep off the majority of it, that plastic is sufficient.
As part of the recycling process, agricultural plastics will be shredded and washed. Well, if they're going to be washed, why do we have to clean them off? I like to think of it in 2 ways. One, through that shredding mechanism. We wouldn't want our swathers or our silage cutters to see big clumps of debris or rocks. And it's for that same reason. It can clog it up, it can dull those knives, or it can break them off. The other reason is similar to if you have a very wet spring, which hopefully we all will have, in that when you come in from those muddy corrals and you're going to wash your boots in the boot bath, you wouldn't just jump right in. You'd probably try to get some of those big clumps of mud off first, and that's so you don't have to change the water that often. Same in the recycling business. So every step that we can take to kind of clean and prep that plastic helps with the efficiency down the line. Do you deliver it yourself, or does somebody come to pick it up? How does the process look after you've gotten sort of a pile of plastic there?
They have come to pick up bales, and so it's been pretty easy for us to manage. We don't make a lot of bales, but I think they're about 3 feet by 3 feet, and we've made a couple of them so far since we've been using it.
Wow, it must really compact in there, all right.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know what percentage of our plastic we're getting. We're probably not doing all of our stuff right now, but this is just from this one feedlot, and our feedlot holds about 8,000 heads. So it's not a huge amount of plastic that we generate in a year, but I believe, if I've got it correct, we usually use around three rolls of silage plastic that are 60 by 200 feet long. So just to give you an idea of the volume we use, it's not a crazy amount, but we are trying our best to reduce or recycle, I guess, the stuff that we have.
Just a quick FYI, you probably won't be throwing these bales into the back of your truck, even if they are small.
In terms of how much plastic goes into a bale, it depends on what you're using. So in terms of silage plastic, so the covers, bunker covers, tarps, or the silo tubes, it's around 23,000 square feet of plastic that actually will fit into a bale that ends up being 42 by 42 by about 30 inches. So 4 by 4 by 2.5 feet. And that will weigh anywhere from 600 to 700 pounds.
What have you learned since being involved in this project?
Maybe just that, like, my concerns that it was just going to be a real pain for us to manage haven't proven to be true. Like it's maybe more just getting our team on board that we should be doing this. And like I said, it wasn't the most pleasant job to do. Sometimes it's just easier to throw things away. You have to go take that extra step to, instead of taking it to our garbage bin, we put it in this instead. That was maybe the biggest challenge.
You mentioned sort of an interest in, I guess, curbing the waste of plastics. What's your hope for the future of this pilot and for the future of agricultural plastics in the province?
I hope that we can find ways to just improve the process of doing it, to make it more accessible for people so that they don't have the barriers either in their heads or in other ways to actually execute and reduce the amount of waste that we produce off our farm. So if we can get together like that and have a simple contraption like we do to do it, not an expensive high-tech thing to do it, and make it easy for people, I guess that sounds like a good win for us.
Ryan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for asking me the questions.
That was Ryan Kasko of Kasko Cattle Company and Davin Johnson of Cleanfarms. That's all for this episode of The Bovine. Stay tuned to ABP Daily and your favorite podcast apps for our next episode. And hey, if you have any idea for a future show or a question you'd like us to answer, or you simply want to share where you're listening from, get in touch on social by tagging Alberta Beef Producers and using hashtag ABP's The Bovine. You can also email us, podcasting@albertabeef.org. Oh, and don't forget, the deadline to apply for Cattlemen's Young Leaders is March 31st, just before midnight. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, if someone asks, you heard it on The Bovine.